right, here we go. Continuing with our spiritual conferences, 9 grades of prayer. Quick review here. We're talking about grades of elevation and ascent towards Christian perfection. The essential process here is becoming more passive and receptive to grace and allowing God to become the source of our actions so He can elevate us to this supernatural level of knowledge and love, which we call deification. We can also call this now growing into the fullness of the image and likeness of God, the perfection of the image and likeness of God. In light of what we talked about in this last unit, okay? Ascetical prayer and mystical prayer are 2 different levels here. So last week we talked about meditation. This week we'll talk about affective prayer, level 3 here, or grade 3. We're still in the realm of ascetic prayer, where we are the primary movers here, okay? We haven't yet reached that level of mystical prayer where the Holy Spirit is the one starting and stopping our prayer, okay? So, vocal prayer, meditation, already been through these. Grade 3, affective prayer. This is basically a simplified meditation in which the affections predominate over the intellect. And the affections are feelings of love, essentially, for God, for supernatural object that we're meditating on, okay? But especially and ultimately for God. So compare this to meditation. Why is this a step up from meditation? So in meditation, the intellect is dominant over the affections. In other words, we're thinking more than we're feeling, okay? But remember, the goal of meditation is to increase our love for God, ultimately, and allow that to transform us. So in meditation, thinking is predominant over the feelings of love. In affective prayer, the affections or feelings of love for God become dominant over our thinking. Okay, so remember what we talked about last week, knowledge leads to love. You can't love what you don't know. So meditation gives us the deeper understanding, deeper knowledge of God, and then the affections, those feelings of love and desire for union with God follow from that knowledge. Okay, so this is a step forward from meditation because there's an increase of love, and therefore it's closer to mystical prayer, which is basically being caught up in the love of God, okay, the love within the Trinity. It's also less active. So affective prayer is less active and more passive because the intellect, when you're thinking about something, you're actively chewing on it, so to speak. All right, then you're actually more active. You are applying your mind to something. Whereas you get to affective prayer, and that process of thinking actively gives way a little bit to passively feeling. And so instead of the intellect, now the will is taking over, but it's moved by the love for God. Okay, so this is a more passive process, which prepares us to be moved by God then into mystical prayer. All right, so we're moving up the ladder, so to speak. Okay, some things on the practical practice here. So affective prayer is fed by meditation. So meditation provides the material that stimulates your feelings of love for God and your desire for union with Him. Okay, so affective prayer has to have some object in mind. So you lead from meditation naturally into affective prayer. So you got to avoid 2 extremes. You don't want to leave meditation too early, before the affections are stirred up. And you don't want to leave meditation too late because by then you're tired, you're bored, and you don't have any spiritual energy left, sort of. You don't have any focus left. Very important, don't try to force the affections, just like in the rest of your life. You can't force yourself to feel a certain way. Okay, you can acknowledge when you do or do not feel a certain way, but you can't force it, just like you can't force yourself to fall in love with a person. So don't try. All that's going to do is block you from eventually experiencing this. Okay, the affections will naturally respond if you continue meditating on a regular basis, especially daily, but at least regularly, and you get good at it and you try to be more passive, all right, then the affections will follow naturally from your meditation. And then as soon as the affections do pop up, don't just keep reading, okay? Follow the heart. So when the affections do pop up, stop reading and let those affections lead you deeper into that relationship with God. And once the affections go away, return to reading, okay? And then re-engage and see if the affections come back. Some dangers, though, in this. Number one, trying to force our affections, like I said. Number two, getting too attached to good feelings. Okay, so getting too attached to the affections for God can actually block your spiritual progress. The affections are there because they help us to bond with God. Okay, they lead us deeper in that union. They keep us coming back to prayer consistently. But if you fall in love with the feelings instead of falling in love with God Himself, then eventually the feelings will go away and you'll panic, you'll lose spiritual momentum, and your progress will stop. You'll actually start backsliding. Okay. So enjoy the feelings while they're there, allow them to help you bond with God. But affective prayer is ultimately meant to give way to higher grades of prayer, deeper union with God, which doesn't always involve those pleasant feelings. Okay. So don't get too attached to the affections. Finally, the fruits here. Okay. So love by its nature unites us to whatever it is we love. Okay. So these affections, okay, these feelings of love for God obviously deepens our union with God. That brings us deeper for a while into that communion. I could have erased that one. It also increases the other infused virtues. So remember, love, aka charity, is the most important theological virtue that's infused into our soul through grace. As we grow in charity, we also grow in faith and hope. All right, so that's good. The how pleasant the prayer is can actually lead us into the greater practice of virtue as well. So it can make us act better because we feel a greater connection with God. All right, but ultimately, the measure of whether or not affective prayer is helping you is this: is it making you more virtuous? Is it making you more pure in your intentions? Is it helping you develop a spirit of self denial and a healthy detachment from the world? Is it making you more charitable and faithful in fulfilling whatever duties or responsibilities you have? Okay. Is it making you a better person? Basically, closer to perfection. So your emotions are not the measure of whether or not this prayer is working. Okay. Ultimately, prayer is meant to allow God to transform us, and He can transform us without us feeling a certain way. So we've got to learn to enjoy the feelings, but not get too attached, not get stuck on those, and judge, well, that was a bad prayer session because I didn't feel anything. That's not necessarily true. That could have been actually more transformative than a time of prayer that felt more emotionally satisfying. All right. And always keep in mind, affective prayer is not the final goal, right? This is a step along the way to mystical prayer, okay? So it's a nice level of prayer. We all want to get to that and enjoy it, but ultimately you got to detach and move forward into what's called the prayer of acquired recollection, which then leads into infused contemplation. And we'll talk about acquired recollection next time. All right, have a great weekend. Keep praying, and I'll see you next week.